Hey, you're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and on each episode, I invite not one, but two guests to join me for a conversation-style interview. These are smart, funny, usually a little eccentric, frequently a little weird, often very online friends of mine, and even if you don't understand what they have in common at first, just wait, because I've seen some common ground between them that I've been dying to ask them about, and just press record. The show practically named itself, seriously. So subscribe, like, comment below, and stick around at the end of the disclosures, disclaimers, and reminders, and, come find me, cultishcreative.com, at cultishcreative on Twitter, and by name on LinkedIn. Without further ado, throw your seatbelts on. Let's make it a record. Okay, I am pressing record now.
Thank you for joining us. The excitement about this is we started this series on YouTube, partly after some conversations that Ben and I were having about demonstrating how we talk to each other across the gaps and across other things. And I've long been fascinated by this idea of not just interviewing one person about, a life story or something else, but interviewing multiple people at the same time to just demonstrate how to have a conversation, how to be engaged, how to take notes, how to have fun. So we're going to do this live recording of a show I like to call Just Press Record. I'd like to introduce you to my guests. The Bradlee Pitt of YouTube Comments Fight Club. The Bradlee Knoll of Sublime Tunesmithing. The Bradlee Cooper of Silver Ear Linings for Silver Years Standing Styles. And what might be his pre-post-conference appearance of the day, the postmodern Postmaster General of Musical Letters across time, Mr. Scott Bradlee, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow. That was amazing. I need to write that down. Yeah, okay, great.
We'll take a picture of the page for you afterwards. Now, she may be the printer, fax, scanner combo of ideas, videos, and whatever the modern equivalent of that Kinko's Killers was. She's proof of, if Cylons do exist, Kinko's and Battlestar already in this reference, this is bad, they can coexist with humans and as a genius robot, which is my only explanation of her. If this one's for you, Scott. If you can get with this economy or you can get with that economy, but you can't beat her new book with a bat economy. Tortured song reference just for Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, let's call these vibes into session. Say hello to Kyla Scanlon.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm really fascinated here and why I wanted these specific two on the stage is not because Kyla already posted a video this morning somehow about the topic, which I didn't find out about. Tom Morgan, please dissect this with me later. But I wanted to talk to them about nostalgia. I want to talk about what it is. I wrote down, just as a reminder, the definition from the internet is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. That's a lot of words. I also saw the writer Doug Larson said nostalgia is a file that removes the rough edges from the good old days. And if I turn to the philosopher and poet Pusha T, remembering his coke dealing in the Chicago Burbs days as I'm like Ferris Bueller cutting school with his jewels on. This word is so interesting to me, and because you had a post about it already this morning, like nostalgia, what does it even mean to you? Do you have any definition of it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know we were going to be talking about this morning, so it's funny that we are. But the video that I posted this morning was about Pixar. So Pixar announced, they were on the cover of Bloomberg Business Week, and they're like, we're just going to keep on doing sequels and prequels. And everyone was like, Pixar, please stop. Like, that's not what you're meant to be doing. And but Pixar is like really leaning into the idea of nostalgia. And their whole concept is, we don't want to tell personal stories. We want to tell stories with mass appeal. But the stories that do have mass appeal are personal, right? Because that's how you get to the universal we, is like when you do tell all these personal stories as a collective. And so Pixar is leaning into the idea of nostalgia. And then I write about this a little bit in the book because I had a post on it a year ago, on the nostalgia cycle loop. And so it's this idea that like everything that we kind of consume, at least on a mass market level, is nostalgic. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a lot of that is just repeats of the same exact story over and over again, because that's the business model. Because a story about superheroes is going to make a lot of money, so there's less risk taking. But when we kind of tell the same stories over and over again, that reduces the collective imagination. People get tired, they get frustrated, and when the collective imagination gets reduced, people get stuck, right? Nostalgia, in a sense, encourages stagnancy. And so I think that's kind of where we're at, more nostalgia, less imagination, ultimately less hope, because you're not leaning into these really inspiring stories. And yeah, it just ties into the economic theory at large. But that's the long definition of how I think about nostalgia.
Scott, what about you? Like, when you think about just the word itself, what does it mean, evoke?
Well, I mean, all those definitions were great. What Kyla just said was great. Actually, I think I'm just going to piggyback on what she was saying. I thought that was really, really astute about how when you use, nostalgia as something that has mass appeal, like looking at these like Marvel movies. I mean, that's like a perfect example, right? Like that's what, almost to the point that everybody has kind of noticed that these Marvel movies, it's like they're just really kind of giving
They're
more
really
of this. Just yeah.
They won't stop.
So, I guess about maybe like a year ago or a year or two ago, I went through like a little phase where I was writing. I was doing a lot of writing, and I wrote a piece about kind of contrasting reboot culture and remix culture. So, remix culture is kind of like what I grew up in, and Matt too, like with hip hop and things like that. And that was basically taking something that was old that contained nostalgia. An example of old school hip hop. They were taking these, break beats from 70s soul records. They would find one part of it, they would loop it, and then, rap over that or add some other elements, add a different bass line, something like that. So it was kind of like a blending. It was using nostalgia, but it was using it to create something new. And then the other side is reboot culture. Reboot culture would be the example of just, okay, we're rehashing, you know what, we're going to bring back this franchise. Remember this thing that you loved back in the 80s? We're going to do it again, and it's just not going to be as good. It's not going to be as inspired. It's going to be somebody else directing. It's going to be a lot safer in the choices that they make and stuff. And I think that reboot culture is leaning into nostalgia in a way that it's not creative. It's not productive.
Yeah, what's interesting about nostalgia, I'm going to say her name wrong, but Svetla Boym, she wrote this really great book called The Future of Nostalgia. And she talks about how nostalgia is ultimately a defense mechanism. Like we kind of lean into looking at the past because the future is so scary. And she has this line, I have all these notes pulled up on my phone, so that's why I'm looking down at my lap. But the past has become much more unpredictable than the future, right? So we always look back to the past as a way to defend against what we think the future could be. But also because it's so unpredictable, we're able to shape it into whatever we want it to be. There was a really good article from the Washington Post a few days ago that was talking about how the best music was always when everybody was a teenager. So it doesn't matter what age you are, but the best music was when you were a teen. And that's the idea of nostalgia. Like we look back on the past with these really rose-colored glasses because we're able to shape it into whatever we want it to be. Like ultimately it's so unpredictable because we can shape it into whatever we want it to be. And then Adam Mastriani, I think I said his name right, but he has written extensively about this, the idea of nostalgia. And what's funny about nostalgia, and I'm totally like not answering any specific question right now, but what's funny about nostalgia is our memory is biased towards it, right? So our memory is biased towards this positive information, this positive interpretation of whatever we've gone through, but our present attention is always focused on threat. And so that's kind of also why we look back at the past as being so good, is because we view the present as such a threat. And that leans into something that I'm really interested in as a researcher, is like that's our general perception of everything getting worse, as we think that the past was so good, the present is so bad, and that, therefore we think everything is bad moving forward too.
Did you say, is it the past has become more unpredictable than the future?
Yeah.
That's a heck of a statement.
Yeah.
The book is really, really good. Yes, I won't get into it, but I highly recommend it. It's called The Future of Nostalgia.
Scott, I want you to think about it from like the postmodern jukebox thing. Like so I would say that's more of a remix, obviously, than a reboot, number one. But what is it about, like, there's more layers of story that you're interjecting into it when you're doing a remix. Like how do you think about that from not as a business, but just like you've done this more than once?
As a creative process or
Yeah,
something like that. Okay. And wait, what was the question? It was, how do you think of the layers of?
How do you think of the layers of nostalgia that are there or not there when you're saying, let's play this Megan Trainor song as whatever?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, well, I guess that there's, at the level of, for those who don't know what I do is I take basically modern day pop songs, put them back in time, how they would sound back in the day, whether it was the 1940s or 50s or 60s, and we use like a whole big cast of different musicians that kind of give these. It's not that we're trying to be period correct either. It's not trying to be a period piece. It's not meant to be like this is exactly how it would sound in 1940. It's more of meant to draw parallels between different things. And a lot of times, there's a lot of ways to do that with music. Obviously, like you could draw a parallel between the lyrics of one modern day song and a song from the past. Whether it's a Megan Trainor song today, or it could be something like a Connie Francis song from the past or something. So there's ways to draw those parallels and it lyrically, but also musically as well. And then kind of the next, I guess the bigger picture of that would be putting together a show, and that's. So our main thing is we do tours. We do these kind of variety style shows. So it's basically when we first came out, this was back in like 2014, we kind of built ourselves as Lawrence Welk with 100% more twerking. So that was like the description of it. So, and it was really just to capture, okay, we're taking the variety show concept, which is, that's a classic concept, and we're giving it kind of a modern facade. But at the same time, we're taking these modern day pop songs and we're giving them a classic facade. So, I think it's just those juxtapositions between old and new, they can be really endlessly fascinating if you play with them a bit.
Kyla, I'm actually thinking like the performance aspect of going to see live music versus like making a movie and going to see a movie. Is there a difference between just personally like going to see like a show or going to hear something live with people actually doing it? It could be a play too, versus like going to see a movie. Is there a difference in the way we take that in experientially?
Yeah, I think so. So I think it's a couple of things, right? Like there's the movie theater, there's streaming movies, and then there's like a live concert. And so when you go to a live concert, you're a part of the community, like everybody's together, you can feel it, it's great, the energy is wonderful. When you go to a movie theater, it's the same sort of experience, but you're still like a little bit isolated, everybody's sort of tuned in, but you can sort of feel everything on the big screen. I think Scorsese is like, you have to go see all movies in movie theaters, because if you see it on a tiny screen, if you stream it, it's a much different experience. And so I do think, yeah, there's a big difference between, sitting in your room and staring at your laptop versus being out in the world. Yeah.
Do you see anything in just differences with like how people prefer, and I don't know if you have any data on this at all, I'm blindsided with this question. Is there any differences in like how different either generations or people consume stuff, or how this changes over time?
Yeah. I think so. Streaming is extraordinarily popular and became very popular during the pandemic. So I think people are more likely to watch a movie on streaming. But I think, Disney is starting to learn that that's maybe not the best thing. They've lost a ton of money on streaming. And so they're like, oh, like maybe we should publish these movies in the box office. Like that might be a good idea. But it's funny because you know way more about this than I do, but just tangentially, I know it's extraordinarily expensive to go on tour now, versus like maybe it used to be a lot cheaper in the past. So I think like the economies of scale are a little bit funky for how we think about these collective experiences that are so foundational to the human experience.
This is the most expensive podcast I've ever recorded in my life.
Yeah.
For starters.
Yeah, talk about economies of scale.
Yeah, exactly. How do you think about that?
Well, that's definitely true. It's, very expensive to go on tour. And in kind of a weird way, like it's still on the very low level, playing small rock clubs and things like that, van tours, for instance, those you can still do those. And then on the other level, the Taylor Swift type of Eras tours, things like that, that's piece of cake. She can pull those off, she has the draw. So it's really in the middle. And I think it's similar to the discussion we had about, I think, colleges as well. It was really in the middle where we're seeing, you know, mid-level touring is very difficult because it's not quite,
Well, it's like mid-level anything is kind of difficult,
right?
right? Like
Yeah.
like you see sort of the shrinkage of the middle class. You see like everything is sort of going to the tail ends of the distribution. And
Right.
it's like this really big bifurcation that's becoming a big thematic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, I got a question for you because we
Oh,
were talking about all
sure.
this, and I got to read your piece too. Like it sounds amazing. All the stuff
Yeah.
that you've been saying is it's been.
Oh, thanks.
I'm trying to take notes of this, but so I feel like the nostalgia trap, the trap of nostalgia, right? It's kind of like the utopia trap,
Yeah,
right? When
yeah,
people
yeah.
will describe a utopia, it's like when anybody's promising you utopia, just run the other way.
Yeah.
That's just.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's that, and I feel like it's kind of the same thing with nostalgia, but at the same time, there can be some value, some good found in, certainly trying to strive for a better society is a great ideal. And I wonder if there's something like that in nostalgia, embedded in nostalgia, where something could be to lead people to something, a productive use of it, I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like that idea that I was talking about yesterday, like nuance doesn't sell.
Right.
Like it's the same thing with nostalgia. Like not all of it is bad. But and I don't have data on this. It's just a vibe. But like I do think that we're like leaning into nostalgia a little bit more. And this book, Present Shock by Douglas Rushkoff, it's very like woo, but like he talks about how time is compressed. So like everything that we experience is like the past, the present, and the future all at once. And so how we think about nostalgia is actually a little bit weird because like we are experiencing the past because you can go online and like view all these videos and you're sort of there in the way that it makes sense only in the online sphere. But yeah, I mean, there's another quote from the book, The Future of Nostalgia, and she says, contemporary nostalgia is not so much about the past as the vanishing present. And so I think like this is not really answering your question, but I think that is also what's going on is time has been compressed. So we feel everything all at once. And so it's a lot easier to go to the theoretical past. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like I think people get a lot of value, a lot of economic value, right, from going and viewing sequels and prequels. But I think my big worry is like, where's the inspiration in those stories? And also, if you're not able to take an economic bet on a new story from a movie outlet, right? If you're saying like, oh, we just need another superhero, we need Iron Man to do this now, Spider-Man to do that, and you're not leaning into the new stuff, I think that's where it gets hard.
You get Broadway today, which
right.
they put Disney sells, but to get a new work on Broadway, I mean, these are expensive theaters. I mean, Broadway is ripe for disruption because the cost of putting on a Broadway show is so expensive, so they can't take any bets. So, and now, so what you were saying about the compressing time, everything, how much of that is access like right now? Because it's only been in the last 10 years where like you can go on YouTube and find any clip of any show from the past. Like they have these things. Have you ever seen it's like my70stv.com, my80stv?
No.
So it's like this. Somebody built this website that just basically pulls, I guess, from YouTube videos, but it simulates the experience of watching like an 80s, like the TV in the 80s with the commercials and everything. So then it has like it just pulls from different.
I watched the first 20 hours of MTV on this thing. It's like amazing from the rocket launch to the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. So I wonder how much of it is, well, it's kind of, that's still a novelty to that. Right. I mean, I remember, my late father, when I showed him YouTube for the first time and I showed him, he could look up, he found a song that he hadn't heard since he was a kid. And he loved that song, but he only heard it on the radio, like growing up in Rhode Island, like a couple of times. And he just like really loved this song, and I mean, he was just amazed. He was blown away. I mean, just by that you can pull this up now. We have this technology to do that. So I wonder how much of the obsession with nostalgia is also just us getting accustomed to that access.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely access to information, but I also think it's the elimination of uncertainty, right? And so like, that if you go to the 70s TV show and you were around in the 70s, you'll be like, I kind of know what I'm going to get from this. And so I think it's that. It's like the minimization of risk. And people, I think, are for a lot of reasons, they're a lot more risk averse than they used to be. Morgan Housel, who is amazing, he has this quote where he says this. He says, a lot of times we're not interested in truth, we're interested in the elimination of uncertainty. And that fact alone causes us to believe things that have little relation to reality. And so I think it's definitely like the information flow, there's too much all at once, like it's impossible to log on to anything now. But yeah, I think it's also people seek out that safety and stability and that predictability.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Do you feel like with what you're making that there's actually a reduction of uncertainty? Like when I take like I'm trying to think of a good example from something you like. I'm taking something that's not just real and of the moment. What's the most like recent pop song you've redone?
Drawing a blank now.
Yeah, it's okay. All I can think of is
we did Die For You. We did By the Weekend.
Okay.
So we took
Nice.
and we did that as kind of a James Bond theme. So, but like 70s James Bond. So it's very, so you can already picture the style.
So when you're doing that though, by making it James Bond themed, that's an awesome one too, by the way.
Yeah.
Especially 70s James Bond, like giving it that whole vibe.
Yeah.
Which I did not mean to do, but
it's okay.
No, we're gonna brand that word because didn't somebody use Vibe Session and then they didn't?
Well, they said
they came up with it or something?
It's okay. I'm hiring a lawyer.
Good.
But when you're setting the Kyla Scanlon
vibe,
when you're setting the vibe to be 70s Bond, like you're also saying, so kids who know this weekend thing, I'm going to embed this another way so it's familiar but different enough. It's the California sushi roll, like gateway drug for somebody else to understand this thing. Like, how do you think about, because that's working on these different levels too, of like making sure that risk is being minimized. Like I can like this weekend song if it's presented to me in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to. I mean, I try not to make it the California sushi roll, because I'm
more of the General Tso's chicken.
But and it's less about well, here's a way for you to enjoy it's really. I mean, it just comes down to if you follow the concept, just what the concept is. That usually doesn't steer me wrong. It's only if we try to do something, if we like really try, like we're going to really try to make people like this, like that never works, because that's not really being authentic to what, so this, but I would say that like to use that example. I mean, there's nostalgia in so many ways. Like you could be nostalgic for James Bond themes, Shirley Bassey, all these, great singers that sang it, you can be nostalgic if you're the next generation younger. Maybe you don't know the movies, but you remember the video game playing GoldenEye or whatever on, so, and then there's that iconic, that sound of the James Bond with the murder guitar and the like the strings and stuff like that. I mean, that's culturally coded now. Like we recognize that as James Bond. You don't have to even see James Bond movies to know what that is, like that's so embedded. That's so in us. So then there's kind of layers to, like you're talking about, layers of nostalgia, in just one song. But I still try to approach it from the way of like, we're gonna make something new. I don't want it to be cut and paste. I don't want it to be the lazy version.
I'm curious. Have you run into Freya India's writing yet? Do you know her at all?
I don't know.
I think it's with Jonathan Haidt now.
Yeah, sure.
So she introduced me and everybody else who reads her to this word, Anemoia, which I'm probably mispronouncing horribly, but she defined it as nostalgia for a time or place one has never known.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
No, so that gets into the idea of the unpredictability, right? Yeah. You're able to reinvent the past. Like it's really never as good as you thought it was. I think that's like a big thing that people have discovered in research and how we think about it. But what's funny about that is like the reason that we reinvent it and like add these sort of cushions to the experience is because it is a defense mechanism. Like nostalgia is ultimately, it's a defense mechanism, as I've said a couple of times, like against unpredictability. I think that's spot on.
And do you feel like, sticking with you for a second on this, like, do you feel like generationally, like are kids more prone to this because of the compressed discovery?
Maybe. I mean, I think that and this is like half baked, so I apologize that it's not fully
That's the
formed.
point of this whole podcast.
I know. I just I've been like stuck on this idea. This is like something that haunts me at night. I'm like, what's happening? But yeah, I mean, I think that for the younger generation, it is a sense of like, oh, things were better in the past. And I spend a lot of time thinking about consumer sentiment, and I think part of that feeds into like consumer sentiment is people thought the 1950s were cheaper, but then when you look at it on an income adjusted basis, it's not necessarily true. But I really think it's kind of, one of Toby Shorin wrote this piece called Life After Lifestyle. Yeah, Tom introduced it to me. Tom introduces everybody to everything, I think. But it's this idea that, everything that we kind of interact with has been dictated by brands, like culture is sort of defined by brands now. And so I think the way that we interact with the world is much more driven by what we see on a cultural level. So like whether that be brands or whether that be movies, et cetera. And all that ends up looking backwards. So I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I think it's more commonplace because of what brands are doing, because of what movies are doing, because
It's
of
like kind of parasocial relationships.
kinda, yeah. I mean, it's just the profitability mechanism is to lean into the past because that's what makes people feel soft and safe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen like there's a trend? I guess it was on TikTok. It was called core.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
was like it was just
Yeah.
basically, I mean, that's nostalgia right there.
Yeah.
It was the idea was all these like Gen Z kids were making videos, and I guess it was always like a scene of like, it would be like elderly people walking together that had been married for like 50
Yeah.
years with like soft music and like soft lighting and everything. And it was to kind of capture, like I guess a longing for that kind of,
Yeah.
to live in that time,
Yeah.
And I do think it is because Gen Z is bombarded with information,
Yeah.
and it's just everything is an abstraction to them. And I think that what they're really, I think it's a loneliness thing.
Yeah, and so another line from that book that I was talking about, The Future of Nostalgia, she writes, culture is increasingly squeezed between the entertainment industry and religion. And I
Yeah.
think that's true too. You do have these younger people that are being bombarded by social media apps and like movies and stuff. And it is kind of like these iterations of this perfect life. And I think it's hard to escape. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you're 27. Did you
I'm
say? Is that-
26.
you're
Yeah.
26. Okay. So then you grew up really with the online
Yeah.
world, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, well, both of us, we were kind of the generation where we remember the before time.
We're the
you know?
prior gap, like early 40s, where it's like we didn't have a smartphone or a cell phone
Right.
until cell phone till college.
Me, same here.
And
yeah.
partway through college, it took
Yeah.
blowing a tire on a highway and
Yeah.
walking a mile to a payphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I had one that had like an access code. You had to do like a 10-digit access code, then dial the number. So it was like, I'm not even going to use this thing. you know?
Yeah. Well, and like, now, so I had a cell phone when I was first like in middle school.
Okay.
But now kids are getting them so early. And Jonathan Haidt, who you referenced earlier, has done a lot of work. He's like, and I think actually somebody talked about it yesterday, like, are the phones breaking the kids' brains? And I think
Yes.
it's like, it's weird. So there's this thing with, I promise this will make sense. I know I kind of like go off on tangents a lot, but there's this thing with AirPods where it's you probably know about this, like the music is so compressed, you're not actually getting a very good auditory experience. And so everything that we kind of consume music wise is like digitized to the point where it doesn't sound that good. And when you actually listen to music on like very good speakers and like very good audio, it's a completely different musical experience. And I think that's kind of the same with the kids and phones, is you do kind of get trapped in this loop of like, oh, like I should be living this certain life. I should be doing this certain thing. Like the past was better. But when you go out into the real world and like have a real world experience or listen to music, not on the AirPods, I think it's just a totally different way of looking at things. And I think that's kind of what we have to do, to go back to the point of the podcast, to get out of the nostalgia loop, is kind of like be around each other a bit more in the real world, like put the AirPods away kind of thing.
No, I mean,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, because I
that's
think
important.
that was a benefit to growing up without a phone.
It was a total benefit. And you got to say, just like, I mean, it was so fun. You just go outside, play with your friends. You don't have a care of like all these other things. You're not so distracted. And as a result, I think our generation got to experience, having lots of long lasting friendships. Like our camera guy right here, Steve, I've known him way back in the day. We grew up together. So I think that yeah, I do wish that the generations that came after us could get some of that experience, and I'm not saying, I don't think it's impossible. I think that there's a way that, again, social media, whatever you want to call it, is a new medium. It's a new thing, and it's gotten to an extreme, and then I feel like it's starting to. I mean, people are at least aware of like the problems with it, and people are kind of finding new ways to use it, with a little bit more curation, a little more privacy and things. So, I mean, I do think it corrects in time. I don't know. Are you optimistic about that too?
Yeah, well, I feel like a hypocrite whenever I talk about social media because I make videos on social media. Like
Yeah,
that's my
yeah. I mean,
job.
yeah. Well, we have to,
Um,
right? Like it's
yeah, and like I think the way that I think about social media and the reason that I started making videos on the platforms, because I'm on like everything, is because I think it can be a tool if we use it correctly. And so I think it goes back to that idea like nuance doesn't sell. And I think it's getting to what you're getting at, where it's like social media does have a lot of really bad stuff, but Twitter is the reason I know Tom and Dave and everybody. So I think that's kind of like how we have to think about it is like it probably does need to have some form of guardrails on it, but I don't think it's necessarily an all bad thing. Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's an early iteration
Yeah.
of this concept.
Yeah.
So nuance doesn't sell.
I know.
And
I
this-
keep on saying
No,
that.
no, but I really love that perspective because it just
It's true,
reminds you,
yeah.
if you don't like focus an idea, you're just rambling, and there's no value in just there's some value in blind rambling, but maybe if you're selling supplements on a podcast or something, that's the way to do it. But even that's a matter of focus. So then when you think about nuance doesn't sell, but you're also thinking about not just selling a book, but like helping these ideas, like what do you want to sell that you feel good about selling?
I mean, yeah. So I think I do try to sell nuance as much as I can. Yeah, yeah. But it's hard because I mean, this is just algorithmic tendency. It's very easy to be a doomer and have your doomer take go very viral because that appeals to kind of the same part of the brain that loves nostalgia. Is we're scared, and so if somebody's like the world is on fire, it's like, oh, I gotta listen to that guy or that person who's saying this thing. And
For
so,
a little while, they don't last. Usually, it doesn't last long.
when do they go away?
I guess, yeah. I mean,
A new one springs up and
there's a new
it's
one
like
in
they
display.
spawn.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I try to do. And like the book is, it has some opinion weaved into it, but it really is just meant to be a straightforward guide to the economy. Because I think that's kind of what we need. Because another thing that's also tangential to the idea of nostalgia is trust. And how do you build trust? This is, there's a very big topic in the presentations yesterday, is how do you build trust in a society that's extraordinarily low trust, right? Like, I think the only institution that has gained in trust over the past couple of years, according to the Harvard Youth Poll, was the United Nations. But trust in like the government, president, et cetera, has dropped tremendously. And so I think in order to rebuild trust, you have to be transparent. You have to tell people like both sides of the story. And it's hard because it is easier, algorithmically speaking, to lean into either side of narrative, as has been discussed on several panels, I think.
And I think social media in its current state or the initial state, I think it kind of it incentivized dishonesty, really, or at least extreme rhetoric, extreme takes, hot takes, things like that. Those are the things that we're seeing that have tons of engagement. But really, if it was flipped, if it was incentivized towards honesty, towards things like that. And I think those things, I think it will come back in fashion, to be honest. I don't know about you. I mean, I think that people are hungry to just be told the truth on things and not be steered in one direction or another. And I think that people are kind of over people that have, predicted 20 of the last, how many crashes or whatever, like what's the saying, Yeah,
8 of the last one.
Right. Yeah. Something like that. But 2 of the last 20 recessions, whatever it is. But
are they hungry for I get the sense people are actually hungry for the nuance of truth, not like the.
Well, we just don't want to be
truth.
duped. People don't want to be duped.
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be duped because somebody's trying to build a following or trying to build influence for themselves.
Yeah. One thing that I'm kind of interested in and is like this idea of the influencer apocalypse, because you're starting to see people like really fight back against these sort of fabricated characters that they've been fed to on social media. And so I think there is going to, as you've been saying, like a desire for transparency, a desire for authenticity. You're seeing that in like, the no filter movement, like just like little internet trends. But yeah, I really think that there is this deep, like almost primal desire to have people just not lie to you. And I think it goes back to the idea of the attention economy, is that people know that they're being monetized. They know their eyeballs are commodities. They're constantly being sold to. And that's quite an exhausting experience. So I do think we're starting to see the shifts just based on like what I've noticed in my little world. Yeah.
No, totally. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the shift happened, we're thinking about celebrity culture, which was,
Right. Yeah.
before there was a huge obsession pre-pandemic with celebrity culture. And then you guys remember all those celebrities they sang Imagine,
Oh,
when
yeah.
the pandemic started, and how like it did not go how they thought it was going to go,
No.
I think
Yeah.
that was kind of a shift of like,
turning point.
it was,
Absolutely.
it was the inflection point.
That was the greatest night in the influencer apocalypse. We'll redo that special.
I felt bad for them. I feel like they're just trying to, they thought that they were doing a good thing,
But they were so out of touch, and I think that's where
thing.
the
That's where the
frustration-
disconnect was.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots
Knowing
of
you're
thoughts.
So
Yeah.
I've got some notes. I'm going to bring this to a close.
Okay.
We started off, we were talking about, Kyla, this whole idea of like no personal and all mass appeal. And but this nostalgia cycle. I have to remember to send you something else that I can't quote or remember from memory that I read in a book on the plane. That was literally about the pop music nostalgia cycle and about the iteration through the creation of top 40 radio. And they're just like, oh, this is the phase.
Well, do you
where we're in
know?
this moment.
Do you know that song Chumbawamba?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got knocked down.
Yeah.
But
Well, that was essentially like a creation to go to the top 40. I don't remember who like put together.
Well, because they were socialists.
Well, what?
You didn't know that part?
No. I know. I don't know what you're saying. But there was like some formula that they followed for Chumbawamba that like another band had done prior. And that was like how Chumbawamba got to the top 40, was they followed this perfect formulation around the nostalgia cycle.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
I have so many questions about that.
Yeah, I know.
Scott, you brought up reboot culture versus remix culture, which I think is really interesting. This whole idea of rebooting the old versus remix and making something new that hits on all sorts of crazy levels for me. Kyla, the past has become more unpredictable than the future. That quote, the threat of the present, the modern back in time, Scott, you brought up Encounter this, the modern back in time doesn't have to be period correct. When you do that with Postmodern Jukebox, you just have to show the parallel of this thing. I have to take issue. Postmodern Jukebox as Lawrence Welk, but with 100% more twerking. You also have 100% less bubbles.
That's true. We thought about it in the early days. We're like, how can we do that?
This idea of, and Kyla, the way you explain this, I need to actually go back and rethink this. The community and concerts, the theater experience, and then the streaming experience. Like there's almost a triangle of these things, how not just the entertainment is presented, but how we in the audience interact between the concert, the theater, and the streaming environment. This idea that mid-level anything is difficult, maybe that's the ultimate nostalgia trap. The idea of like streaming versus small concert, and to do any of those things in the middle. To say, I don't have to scale this to be the biggest thing ever, but I'm comfortable I'm not going to make crap for the bottom, but I'm also not going to make the thing totally on the top. That mid-level thing, I think, might be more mid, everyone. That's inspiring. The idea of the compression of time and the compression of access together as an act of, as you kept saying, like just it's risk minimization. The behavioral finance aspect of this risk minimization.
No, always
so,
finance.
So fucking interesting. The enjoy the concept, Scott, with the idea of the group. Like you don't have to. You can like the Weeknd song even if you have no idea who the Weeknd is, and if that came on out of somebody's passing car stereo, you would shudder. But if I repackage it in this way and just say, no, enjoy the concept, where the concept is the enjoyment. You said, Kyla, about reinventing the past. I wrote down that's basically Kodachrome. That's an even older reference that we won't have time to get into. With less risk, that's that Anemoia definition again. Nostalgic for things you haven't ever experienced. And then fascinating to think about this in the entertainment religion squeeze. Yeah. That's part of like tapping into, you want to be less uncertain? well, let's just mash your religion and entertainment together
Yeah.
to make sure you feel all the way good about this.
Roland Barthes has written about that too in his Worldwide Wrestling piece.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really, really cool stuff. I want to point out that you both are contributing to the problem by making videos on social media. but I don't actually believe that, because I'll probably say I'd have to rank them like next to like Ben Hunt and Rusty Gwynn pieces. Like your stuff has been probably in the group text between like Scott and I.
Yeah,
oh
we
my
sent a
God,
lot,
you
yeah.
see
Yeah.
the way
Oh.
that
A
this
lot of
was
great stuff.
explained?
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, close to the top. So this is
Cool.
extra special for
I
that.
can't wait to read your book too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Book.
The concept of building and not selling trust in a low trust world. And I think that's the thing that I'm so impressed that both of you have done. With or without an influencer apocalypse, the keeping up with the Kinkoed Kardashians was the part that I put in here. Everybody trying to be something.
Yeah.
You guys are both figuring out ways to actually like build trust in a world that emphasizes like not having trust and distrusting things, like distrusting the music mechanization of like make just pop stars. And it's like, no, we don't need to do American Idol to find somebody who does a really amazing thing in a room and then not only get them on a YouTube video, but then take it on tours around
the world. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's a whole different career path that you've more or less accepted because it didn't exist for you. And then the stuff that you're doing to help like explain things, you're connecting people of all different ages with these through lines to concepts and giving us words, Ben's whole presentation, giving us words to actually talk about this stuff in a way that's, hey, it's nuanced and it's selling.
Yeah.
Kyla's got a new book. Scott's got Postmodern Jukebox. Check them all out. This is Just Press Record. Give them a round of applause, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I feel like we just saved the world. There we go. Problem solved. We solved it all.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.